Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I support this bill. We need, though, to do far more. We need to get manufacturing moving. We need to protect Australia from the risks of sources of imported goods drying up. And we need, as Senator Sullivan has said, jobs, jobs, jobs. Queenslanders and Australians everywhere have heard us speak about the gaps in our productive capacity, the gaps in our economic resilience, the gaps in our economic sovereignty, and the gaps in our national security. That was before COVID. Now it's even more so, especially since COVID revealed that we did not even have enough personal protective equipment to protect our valued healthcare workers and everyday Australians. And now we have to store our own oil in the USA because we have nowhere to store it here. And at first, after COVID, we couldn't even manufacture ventilators. But thanks to Aussie ingenuity, and a personal thank you to all those innovative Australians who did step up to fill this gap. Certainly, we need the skills. Australia needs the skills and the capability to ensure that we can protect ourselves from future health disasters and economic disasters, especially things like the prolonged border closures or international transport closures or blockades cut to sea transport. And these are possibilities. We see the news of what's happening in the South China Seas. We see the growing confrontation between America and China. We need to think about our security. So this government has presented a bill for the creation of the position of National Skills Commissioner. Yet we need to ensure this is not just an advisory role. Just setting up this office for 4 years is costing taxpayers over $48 million. And I quite often hear Liberal and Labor people and the Nationals saying, we've spent $1 million here, we've spent tens of millions here, we've spent hundreds of millions here, we've spent a couple of billion here and there. It's not the money that matters, it's the environment in which that money can be turned into something beneficial for the people of Australia. So we expect a return on that $48 million, a return on investment by giving the Commissioner the teeth to ensure that vocational training across Australia is high in quality, consistent and competitively priced. Training by itself is not the answer. It needs to be good, effective training. So where is the accountability between the federal funding of approximately $1.5 billion a year to the states, to the vocational providers, to ensure that our vocational trainees get a high-quality education and an affordable education that really lands them a job? If the government is going to invest $1.5 billion per year in vocational education and training, then Australians have a right to ensure that our taxes are well spent. So we need a review of the performance of the National Skills Commissioner after 12 months or possibly after 3 years. We need that review. We also need to understand that it is not the Commissioner who is going to get us effective training. It is not the Commissioner who is going to decide what skills are needed. Government, Liberal, Labor, Nationals have shown a very poor track record of anticipating demand for specific skills. Those decisions must be based upon what the market needs. It's the men and women in work, it's the men and women investing, men and women leading corporations that determine the skills we need. And actually, going beneath that, it's the market that drives those skills. And they will tell us what skills are needed to service the market. More importantly, we need to restart manufacturing in our country. And that needs more than training. It needs much more than training. It needs an integrated approach, an industry and economic environment which enables and encourages Australian investment. How the hell can people afford to invest when energy prices are so high? How the hell can it be that we don't have reliable, affordable, stable, synchronous electricity? We have the cheapest coal in the world, the highest quality coal in the world. We export that to China, and they produce coal far, far more cheaply, at about 40%. They sell it to their manufacturers at 40% of the price we sell it. Why? Because our electricity prices have doubled in the last 10 years. Why? Because of Liberal, Labor, Nationals policies based on rubbish, a climate scam. That is what's destroying our manufacturing industry. Labour costs are a smaller component of manufacturing these days than they used to be. Electricity prices are significant. We've gone from the lowest priced electricity to the world's highest prices. And that's been due to regulations based not on data, but on opinions from the Liberal, Labor and Nationals governments. How can it be that China takes our coal thousands of kilometres and sells it at 40% of the price that we sell it for? It's regulations. It's government screwing with the market. It's government screwing with regulations. Listen to some of these factors, all government-driven. The renewable energy target, introduced by John Howard's government. The national electricity market, introduced before John Howard, if memory serves me correctly, but worsened under John Howard's government. National energy market is really a racket, not a market, and that's the people in Australia are paying for the price of that. The retail margins are guaranteed in some states at high levels, with very little risk. The networks are gold-plated because of regulations. And then we've got privatisation. In Queensland, our state, the Labor Party up there in the state government uses that as a tax. $1.4 to $1.5 billion a year in tax due to excess charges from the generators. Privatisation, the sale of assets, is failing around the country. That is an essential asset, and it's crippling our manufacturing. It's crippling jobs right across agriculture. Farmers won't irrigate because the price of water is too high. Price of pumping water is too high. Second thing, tax. That's part of the business environment. Multinationals in our country are going without paying tax, any company tax, due to agreements from Robert Menzies' Liberal government in 1953, perpetuated with the lack of tax on the North West Shelf gas that was enabled by Bob Hawke's Labor government in the 1980s. Both sides have done that. Former Deputy Commissioner of Taxation Jim Kalali said in 1996 and the year 2010 that 90% of Australia's large companies are foreign-owned and since 1953 have paid little or no tax. What that means is that mums and dads, families, small businesses, Australian-owned businesses have to pay more tax than they need to. It also means that the Australian businesses are at a competitive disadvantage of about 30% because they have to pay company tax and large companies have to pay company tax and the foreign companies don't. So taxation, we need to set a level playing field by taxing multinationals and reducing the tax burden, simplifying the tax system, having a comprehensive review of tax, because that is one of the most important factors driving the lack of investment from Australians. We also have an abundance of regulations that is crippling our country. We have red tape from the bureaucracies at state, federal and even local level. We have green tape driven by rampant environmentalists. We have blue tape driven by UN, and that is arguably the largest component of tape, the blue tape, most expensive of all, put in place by Liberal, Labor, Nationals governments. And then we have economic management. How can companies prepare, how can companies plan for the longer term, which is needed these days, when we have governments making economic management decisions purely based upon electoral payoffs, not just every 3 years, as it used to be, but now it's an annual cycle. Budgets are based upon bribing taxpayers to vote for that particular party. Economic management is now a 12-month issue, and it's very short-term, and it's counterproductive to good business environment. We have states now with lower accountability because competitive federalism has been wide-handed. The Queensland Labor government can sit on closing its borders and decimating our tourism, decimating small business in our state. And why? Because under the Commonwealth Constitution we are supposed to have competitive federalism. And yet in 1943 the income tax was stolen from the states and given to the federal government. And now essentially more than 50% of state government expenditure is from the federal government, tied to federal government conditions and guidelines, which means effectively that the federal government is running much of what the states do. The federal government is running much of what the local councils do around Queensland and around Australia. I was in the Balonne Shire Council in in 2017 in February, and they told me in answer to a question of mine that 73% of their annual revenue comes from the federal government with strings attached. Not only does the federal government tell them how to manage their local community, the federal government only has 3 to 5 year windows, which means the local councils can't go beyond that time frame in doing their planning. How can local councils make a long-term plan? This is what's hampering governance in this country. So I plead with the government to make sure that we focus on our economic productive capacity, our economic resilience, our economic sovereignty, our economic security, our economic independence, which has been smashed by the quest for the elitist quest for interdependence, which is really depending upon others. That is a loss of dependence. Nonetheless, this legislation will help all Queenslanders to improve our state's economy and to repay the debt hole in which Labor government in Queensland has buried Queenslanders. We need training, but we need jobs. We need Australian jobs. We need Queensland jobs, especially in regional Queensland. Training is a minor component, yet an important component. Beyond that, we need to get back to basics to create the economic environment to drive the Australian investment. As I said, I'll say it again, we need economic productive capacity to be restored. We need economic resilience to be restored. We need economic sovereignty and independence to be restored. We need economic security to be restored. Australia has the people, has the resources, has the opportunity, has the potential. We just need to get back to what we had, get back to the basics. And in the basics, Australia led the world in per capita gross domestic product, per capita income in the early years of our federation, when our constitution was followed and the states behaved competitively toward each other. That's what we need to get back to, a productive environment. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.